Welcome back to We Know Scripted TV, where today we know Dune Prophecy, Season 1, Episode 2, Two Wolves. My name is Grace, but of course, I'm not alone. The other wolf, it's Taran. Taran, how you doing?
Doing well, Grace. Happy to be back in the dunes.
The Dunes, yeah. We've lost one person to the Dunes. That's Josh Wigler, not with us this week. We shall see.
His
Yeah,
motivations were impure, Grace.
they were impure. That's
He
right.
needed to be
Yeah.
taken care of.
We've put him in that harness, sci-fi harness that they put Desmond Hart in. He's just floating in a
Currently just
giant room.
floating, yeah.
hmm Taryn, we talked about Dune Prophecy episode 1 last week. Feel like the general consensus was like, yeah, 7.5, 7 out of 10, was the general feeling. I was maybe a little bit higher on it. And I think interestingly, I'm less high on the show overall after 2 episodes than I was after 1 episode. But I feel like that's the opposite feeling that you're having. So how are you feeling about Dune Prophecy?
Everyone's all over the place. I watched episode 2 and I was like, you know what? I enjoyed that more. Josh watched it and was like, I enjoyed that less. You watched it, you enjoyed it less. So we all kind of flip-flopped a little bit. I think the reason I like this more, we talked about this a little bit on the Tastemakers, but I think that when I have lower expectations coming in, like I did personally with something like Arcane, I start to like acclimate to what I'm expecting from the show. And this episode felt more like, okay, I've lowered my sort of standards to this, and therefore I actually got a little more than I expected. And in particular, I felt like this episode took what the first episode gave it and just ran. Like the 6 episode format, I think works really well here, where I feel like we're not wasting time. Like Desmond is admitting to murder,
Yeah,
having a
yeah.
confrontation with head Bene Gesserit lady. We're like getting rebellion subplots uncovered and blown up in a single episode. Like a lot was happening again, but it felt like, okay, the setup that the previous episode did is now all in place and functioning, and I enjoyed that.
Yeah, I think for me, I think I had this like tremendous realization that basically this show is, I think, mostly to make things make more sense whenever Denis Villeneuve does Dune Part 3. And to me, that's fine. And that probably I should have just the whole time been like, oh, yeah, that's why they're making a Dune TV show. But then they're like, it's set 10,000 years before the start of the movies. And then I was like, oh, well, then how connected can it be? Apparently, extremely. I think, like, and I think that that's totally fine. And it's only for me to be like a week late and be like, okay, I have to now like recalibrate and readjust for what I expected the show or what I thought the show could do. Because I actually think, and I think you and I have been in the same situation a few times. I think actually more notably in Lord of the Rings of Power, where I think that there were times where I was like, I think I'm higher on this, but only because of what I think they're going to end up doing. So like the promise and like the seeds of what they were planting was like, oh, that could be fun. And there's some probably some idiom about expectations, Taryn, like, whatever in that. But then I'm like, oh, that could be really fun. And then when it is not the thing that I thought could be fun, I'm like, oh, it's bad actually. Which is not actually true. It's not actually bad. It's just different than what I thought. So I think that that's where I'm at after 2 episodes, and maybe I'm just like actually playing catch up to where you and Josh were more after last week, and then maybe by next week I'll be like, oh, actually it's good because it's at the exact same level of show that I expected it to be. Taryn, does that make sense? I don't know if that makes
I think
sense.
that makes sense. I think it does. I think for me, especially like I said, the pacing is working. And I've mentioned this before, but like I am not a like we need longer seasons all the time kind of person. I do think that there are many seasons of television that could have used more episodes because they didn't tell their story well enough. But I think more often than not, they have too many. or at the very least, there's not enough story for the amount of episodes they have. And what I appreciated about episode 2 was just how quickly we are moving. And it kind of took me off guard. I was expecting like Desmond to be this undercover person for a little while. And I was expecting, like this, decision about like should she take the poison? Like what's going to happen with that? Like I was expecting these things to just take a little bit longer. And I appreciate that they're not. Like in 2 episodes, we went from Emperor, whose wife is like frustrated with her lack of influence, and is kind of like toothless, to he is now, his wife has influence over him again. He has deep fried his opposition, and he's like potentially like standing up for himself against the Bene Gesserits themselves, and like all of this is going on, and I just appreciate the pace of it, because it makes me actually care about what's coming next, because it's actually going to come next, I feel.
I totally agree with you. Actually, I felt this way. I feel like I've felt this way about a few shows that have aired, actually, specifically HBO shows. So I felt like every week, Mike and I were chatting to talk about the Penguin, and we would be like, and this is probably like setting up the rest of the season. And then we'd get this like forward propulsion of story that I was like, oh, I feel like my brain had been trained for years of watching television of like, and that's what the season will be. And then these shows were like, no, like that's what fans are expecting. So if you want it to feel like it's moving, you have to move quicker. And so I do really appreciate this. And I agree. I had the same sentiment when Desmond reveals to both Emperor Carino and then the grandmother that like she or the mother superior, sorry, that he had killed the boy. I was like, whoa. It's like, wow, just fully admitting it, because I thought that this was going to be like the secret of the season of like what happened. I will say, I think that we were kind of right last week though, when we were like, yeah, but did he kill the other person? And I think the answer to that is no. He doesn't really say yes or no, but he doesn't do that.
Very, very slyly does not actually answer the question. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Which is
and then
interesting.
that to me is fun. There's because like he
Yes.
didn't say no and he didn't say yes. So, I do think that I think this is also an episode that while I was watching it, I was like, yeah, okay, yeah. And like again, I think it's good. I think like now I feel like I've shifted into yours of like, yeah, this was like 7 out of 10. I do feel like the more I like sat down to think about the episode and the things that they're trying to do, the more I did get excited and thought it was interesting. So I am excited to sort of break this apart and chat. There's kind of 3 places, Taran, I think we could start, which is we could stick with Desmond and everything that's happening sort of there. There's this seed of a rebellion that's happening that I want to think we could chat about. And then obviously everything that's happened with the Bene Gesserit. And I'm not sure which one is more enticing for you to start, or potentially what I like to do is like, I want to save that really interesting one till the end. So I'm not sure. Do you want to just start with Desmond? Should we just stick here?
I think that's where I have the most to talk about personally. I don't know what
Yeah.
that means for you, but
No, I like that, because I think I agree, and I think it's the most. Although I think that the other storyline with the Bene Gesserit I thought was like really well executed and really well done. But let's stick with Desmond, where you essentially get this situation where Desmond has admitted to killing Pruitt, and then you have 3 people who are all sort of like deciding what to do with this information. That you have a very powerful, I was gonna say human, but we don't know that to be true. Person in Desmond Hart, where you have the Emperor, you have the Empress, and you have Valya Harkonnen, all of whom get sort of like sucked into this storyline, this episode where seems like Karina was like, I do not like the fact that Desmond Hart potentially killed this little boy. I did not actually ask for him to do that. Let's correct that. Although you did say if he would die, it would not be the biggest deal. The Empress, who's like, what a valuable tool at our disposal. And then I think sort of like Mother Superior, who comes at this like, this is potentially an existential threat to the Bene Gesserit.
yeah, I think this is sort of the thing that I find the most interesting about the show, because it's this little mystery. It's a short show. It's a 6-episode show. I think and talking about the pacing again, like I don't mind that it's so fast, because very quickly I learned like this isn't exactly like the deepest character study in the world. So with that in mind, I appreciate that we're not bogged down in meh characters. And so this mystery is like the thing that has me hooked, because I'm like, okay, who is this guy? I don't know a lot about the lore. So I know there's people who know about the lore who have different theories. But to me, there's a couple questions, right? Like one, as you mentioned, is he human? Because he's able to resist the voice, and stuff like that. But I'm inclined to believe he's probably human, right? Because otherwise, why would he need to like skirt around lies? Seemingly, we're assuming, based on the interrogation from the Mother Superior, that when she asks him directly, "Did you murder one of the Bene Gesserit lady?" He was like, he just like implied that he did, but didn't actually say he did, like an I said I would. And if he's a machine that can't be read, if he's a machine, then that wouldn't matter. And in addition to that, in the previous episode, the Bene Gesserit lady that died did read him as telling the truth previously, for what it's worth. So then why doesn't the voice work on him is a question. And more importantly for me, why does he seem to know about the voice? Right? That's the thing for me, is like he seemed to know it was coming, to the point where he was pretending like it was working on him. Or at the very least, if it was working on him, he wasn't like, what the hell? How did you do that? Like he definitely seemed to know what was going on. And to my knowledge, I don't even know if like Mother Superior has shared the voice with anyone else yet. Like, I don't even know yet. But like he definitely knew about it and knew to anticipate it. And so for me, could be a machine. They planted the machine idea. Also, though, I feel like the other possibility is he has to be working with the other Bene Gesserits, right? Like the rebellious ones in some capacity.
So yeah, and I mean we're gonna get to this, like the thing we find out a little bit in the episode, which is that there is this like rebellious sort of cell that includes Kieran Atreides,
Well, those are
includes
rebellious against the Empire.
rebellious against it. Yes, is this what you mean, or you mean
No, I mean, so
no.
like that in the first part of the first episode,
Oh yeah,
where we see, and this is more relevant to the poison taking portion of the story, where like the grandmother of
Raquella.
Raquella, or whatever,
Yeah.
like ends up
Yeah,
being
yeah.
like, hey, you made me slit my own throat. Like whatever faction she represents, I said this in the previous one. They have to have some kind of importance to the story, and maybe the importance is just this one moment, but I have to imagine it's more than that. And how does Desmond know so much about the Bene Gesserits, between their motivations, their tactics, their methods? Like, unless he is somehow connected to them in some way, right? So that is my thought.
So what's interesting is that I was like, okay, let's like really tear these stories apart, because there's three different things. But I actually think is like, as we're sitting here talking about these things, there's actually a way in which, while they might not immediately seem connected, I think you will. I think you are already, I think, probably tracking these connections, because you, I think, are an astute television watcher and a avid sci-fi fan as well, in the ways in which like these could all be connected. Because I think, yeah, if you think about, I believe her name is Lila, who is Raquella's granddaughter, who does do the agony. This is a similar, this is very similar to what we see Paul do and Paul's mother do in Dune. That this is, you do this ceremony, you do this thing that allows you to speak with your ancestors in a way that then like unlocks your some of this like genetic power. The difference being how it's done. This is the one thing that I'm like, feel like, okay, you tried, which is that like, and not you tried, but that they are being like, it is different from the way it was done in 10,000 years ago than the way it was done in the Dune
They
movies. So
drop like a
that's nice.
drop in her eye versus like drinking a whole vial of it, right?
Yeah, yeah. So that I was like, okay, great. Good start. Good start to be like there are different things that happened 10,000 years in the past. I think you could then immediately be like, well, if that's happening, and I think you're right, probably to say that this is like the rebellious sect of the Bene Gesserit, that like Desmond Hart might be connected to, then if one group was able to move forward in a path that developed things like the voice, I guess the voice was there at the beginning, but the voice, and then the stuff like what could have an alternate version of that do. Here's my question to you, Taran. For me, having read I've read 3 of the books. I feel like it's so clear to me what they're trying to set up. But I feel like, so then my question is that like the folks of us who know, like we could go to Reddit, we could chat. My question to you is like, how much do you, without spoiling what, I don't know what's happening in the show, but I do know I can make an educated assumption about what is happening in this storyline that will then guide us to what they will be able to show whenever, presumably, Dune Part 3 happens. Probably be called Dune Messiah. And I sort of struggle with this sometimes when we're doing like book adaptation stuff because I'm not, but in this one I'm a little torn because it's not really like book adaptation. Like it's not book adaptation.
Well, it's a little bit Lord of the Rings, right? Where it's like Numenor.
Right.
You might
Right.
have a good idea of where that's going.
Yeah.
Although you probably have a better idea of that than this, but
Yes, incredibly so. I think like I don't know for sure that this is what they're doing, but I have a pretty good guess as to what they're
I
trying to
mean,
set up.
my guess. Are you talking specifically about like the rebellious part, or rebellious, like the two factions of the Bene Gesserits,
That
or
plus
just the story in
Desmond.
general?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
My,
See?
I mean, I have to assume that, that Paul Atreides, old Timmy Chalamet, 10,000 years from now is some version of the doom that is being prophesized. He's the one that ends up like destroying the Bene Gesserits somehow, right?
In this way, we're not too far actually from House of the Dragon, which had
Yeah.
the Game of Thrones. Like we just haven't like we had got to see all of Game of Thrones with time House of Dragon come, as opposed to this, where we're in the middle of Dune. Presumably, even just the story. There's a lot of Dune, but we're presumably in the midst of the story that Denis Villeneuve wanted to tell, which, from all accounts, is the first 2 Dune books, which is Dune and then Dune Messiah. And he split up the first Dune book in half,
Mhm.
and Messiah is yet to come. But it's closer to that, in which like House of the Dragon is like interested in this thing of like the prophecy of the Song of Ice and Fire, that eventually then we'll see the whole television show that like does that. We're in the harder part is that we're like in the middle of Dune right now, the movie franchise. Yeah.
Yeah, so like I feel like they're worried about like this prophecy being potentially this Desmond character, or like they've got to do a specific thing. They've got to get this princess on the throne. But so like to me, how prequels normally work is that they will end up succeeding, but it'll be like, oh, but you got it wrong because 10,000 years from now. So that's kind of like where I see this. So I think that Desmond will lose, but secretly win,
Right.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, and then the other part of that, I think the prophecy of like technically they're right or whatever, which is that they like they um they stop the prophecy or whatever is, or prevent it or whatever, is also like at what cost were you able to do that? Like to me, that is sort of part of the thing that I think for me does work about it being 10,000 years ago. I think there's a middle ground between like 100 years and then
I just feel like
10,000
if you
years.
make it 10,000 years, like that's pretty good. Like you did a pretty good job. I feel like that's not a
That's
real
true.
failure.
That's true. You won. You probably did it. But I guess my point is that like there's a way in which you can start to map out when I'm just going to use House of the Dragon because it's also an HBO show, and I do kind of presume if you watched Dune Prophecy, I kind of think maybe you watched House of the Dragon, but I could tell me if I'm wrong about that assumption in the YouTube chats, in the comment section. But some of it's harder where it's like, is Valya Harkonnen going to make it to the Dune movies? Like, no. the answer is like I'm
Hey,
99.9%,
genetic
and
memories.
it's funny that I've been like, well, maybe, but I think it's right. As opposed to like, not necessarily that someone's around during House Flip, but you're like, oh, they kind of have to live long enough to then be able to like be old enough to have a child who then shows up in Game of Thrones. Like, whatever. You can kind of like, you're doing more of this, right? I do kind of think like Tim does, you're like, I think anybody on this show could die in a way that like actually is kind of, there's in some way by setting it so far in the past. And then in my head, I'd be like, can you done like 2000 years? Can you done like, whatever, that, a lot of characters here in terms of like, do I think Desmond's going to die? Yes, I do think Desmond's going to die. Do I think like almost any other character on the show could die? Also, yes. Other than that, if it's like a tremendous success and they want to renew it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you have like the Atreides guy who's like, okay, so 10,000 years from now, they're a pretty powerful family. So I guess things go well. Like you'd be like, well, it's 10,000 years. So many things could change. But then you're like,
Mhm.
but it's not that much of a change. So it shouldn't be that much of a change. It's like,
Well, the piece about this that I think is interesting so far is that like Atreides, and I'll have to like dive into this a little more because I don't know that I can find the answer immediately as we're chatting, and also where I'm podcasting from, my keyboard is quite noisy. But the whole point in of the beginning of Dune is that like the Harkonnens have ruled Arrakis, and then therefore like at that point get told, actually no, you're not in charge of Arrakis anymore. Things are so bad that actually we're going to put the Atreides in, and that's all a setup, right? That's all set up to actually like destroy Atreides by giving themselves this like false sense of security to then come back and attack them in an alliance with the Carino family dynasty. So in this sense, like, and I hate that I can't pull this up right now, but like there is a place that the Atreides will rule before they ruled Arrakis. I guess I don't know right now whether they've like said that they do that or not. There is a level to which I feel right now like the Atreides are not actually in the at the level of place that they are even at the beginning of Dune, which at the beginning
yeah,
of Dune
they feel like a
becomes different.
minor sub family right now, even though they're supposed to be like the heroes of the war. I don't know how
Right.
they got relegated like that, but
Well, but the thing is they could be not relegated, but
maybe they
you
were
could be a great
elevated
fighting. Yeah,
because they were heroes. Yeah.
right. And someone will correct me if I'm all wrong. It's like, actually, no, they do rule this place, and Kieran Atreides is like a long lost cousin who's just there and whatever. But I do think to like where we kind of started here is if you there is a thing that they are setting up, I think, here in terms of like I think that if you have read Dune and like it's hard. I read Dune like very quickly, and so all of it sort of and I start to see like, oh yeah, that makes sense that this is this. I think they're very clearly doing something that if you are super interested in knowing, like you could do the work to go and not with that much work, but see where they're putting the pieces. And I guess what I say so far is like, Taryn, I think you're like, I wouldn't say that like, oh yeah, you've exactly been like, oh yeah, that will be that. Cause I also don't know the answer to that. I'm just making an assumption, but I think like your idea that like that stuff being connected is all the right way to read it so far would be um, my understanding of what I think they're setting up, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, I mean, and like again, like I don't really know the lore stuff, so I'm mostly just thinking about like story wise. Like
Right.
we've been set up with a couple of things. The thing that I don't yet understand is how the machines play into it, unless he just straight up is a machine. Which is sort of like the easiest way to incorporate the machine part of it. Because like they made such a big deal of the machines in the beginning, which you might say is like, okay, that was just backstory, except they then also had that moment where the kid had the boy had a machine. So they reiterated like, hey, thinking machines bad. That's a big part of this story. So it's like that has to be something. Maybe he's using a technology to burn people Maybe he is just a straight up robot, or maybe the robots are like have yet to play a huge role in this. But
W-
that's
Well,
the part that I'm still trying to
and this is all
see.
because the opening montage is like we destroyed the machines and the
That plus
machine
the
and then the
little
boy and the
boy's
boy's
machine.
machine. Okay, I think to put us sort of like on a very similar like playing field in terms of like what's going on. There is a faction that exists that the movies have not really explored, but that absolutely exists in the Dune universe that feels like Desmond Hart is an early version of that. But it is not confirmed that that is it. And really we talked about last week the way in which like that type of machine learning stuff was hinted at by Frank Herbert, but then
Mm-hmm.
really like canonized as lore by his son Brian and another co-author. So then the question to me is like, and just one more piece is that Brian wrote Sisterhood of Dune, the book that this is like loosely based on. So then I guess the question is like, is this about a moment in time where like this we're about 120 years after the opening montage of episode 1. This is a show that wants to get to the point where this Desmond is a member of that, like an early, member of this other faction that exists, um, that maybe was still using machines or in the future uses machines or blah 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 blah, or they're not that. All the people who are like, it's this particular piece of lore, like we're all wrong. And is it actually some other story that they're more interested? And I guess the question would be like, why are they interested in telling this story? And in my opinion, I think like, as I'm 2 episodes in, I do feel like this is to set up all the movie stuff. And if I take like so my inclination to you, Darren, is like, I wouldn't worry so much about the machine stuff. But I also think you're not right to say, well, it's in there. They put it in there and they had the boy have them. Actually, the boy having the machine is actually the best evidence for like, they want you to think about machines. And so maybe AI machines is a thing that the show will explore. But that's kind of, I think, where like the Dune lore readers are being like, is it this or is it this? Is like, are they interested in machine stuff or is it like super like canonized lore stuff from Frank Herbert that's coming in? And I feel like I'm talking about it too generically for it to be interesting. So interrupt me at any time, Taryn.
Well, okay. So my other thought was, at least, and actually, my first thought was that this Desmond character is perhaps working for the emperor, the empress, the emperor's wife.
Very fun. Fun
That was my
theory.
first thought, but then they have a conversation like they haven't met before, and I was like, oh, okay, maybe not. But then I reconsidered again because I get suspicious when some guy comes in and like everything she's ever wanted seems to just be happening for her. The Bene Gesserit advisor, the truth sayer, whatever, is killed, no longer influencing her husband. Now all of a sudden she gets to influence her husband again, and she has this awesome weapon that she's now being able to use to advance her own goals. She gets to stop the wedding. She gets to, like, everything she wanted in the first episode, she was frustrated she wasn't getting. All of a sudden, just magically, as, oh, what a coincidence. It's just everything's turning up great for her. And she didn't seem that surprised or weirded out by the Desmond thing. Like, she was a little bit like, what? Oh, but we should use him, right?
Yeah, that's
Which
right.
I thought was very suspicious. So to me, it's possible that she's somehow connected as well, and that maybe she just hasn't met Desmond before, or was just like reaffirming that he was loyal to the cause of whatever she's doing.
Well,
Because she also seems to be anti-Bene Gesserit, which seems relevant to this story.
yeah, I kept thinking after week 1 that like so much of the heart of the story was these two Harkonnen sisters, who have Valya and Tula, which was like, okay, like Harkonnen Civil War, which definitely is still on the table. But I do think there's a little bit in my head. I have said, who is the person, and this doesn't really track because Desmond and the Empress are in the same place, but like, who killed this other Bene Gesserit? That there are more people, and so I'm not saying that's the Empress who killed, the other Bene Gesserit, but who like in my head, it's kind of like there's the Bene Gesserit and there's secret other little faction that's
It's got to
happening,
be one of
right?
those students, one or more.
The one who's like, don't let them sacrifice you
Well,
to
that's the
you know,
obvious
like they're
one,
yes.
but
There's another one. Yeah.
they've introduced other random ones, you know?
Yeah. So all that to say is like I think they could do this in a couple that like you start to like pull back the curtain and you see it. And the thing about um what's kind of fun, I think, if you're the creators of the show to get to play around in secret sisterhood cult groups, or maybe not sisterhood, right? But if you think that like you're talking about like, oh well, Desmond and the Empress like look like they don't have met each other. Well, maybe they haven't met each other. It doesn't mean they're not connected or know
Right.
of each other and know what's happening. Like there's a lot of ways to play with that reveal of the Empress being behind bringing Desmond here in the first place. That certainly I think the Empress could be involved in that work. Being, it's funny because then I can talk myself into her being like anti Bene Gesserit. And I can also talk to myself and like, what if she's secretly like somehow, well, like, but everything, because a lot of the things that what we've learned from the Dune movies and about the Bene Gesserit is like the whole thing is like control of every decision. Literally to the point, like we get this in Dune, which is like Paul was supposed to be not born a boy. Like the whole point was that he would be like Jessica would have a girl who would get married to I can't remember who there's the Harkonnen set. I think one of the Harkonnen set. Like the whole point, like, and that's the like the level of control they have, where like the difference between what they're able to do with the poison then and the poison in the future is that like they could take poison and they control their bodies to like make sure it doesn't poison them, but they get all the benefits of it's basically like they can drink and have fun without having a hangover, right? Like that's like this is the sci-fi nature of the Bene Gesserit. So, but what I say is that like the stuff where you're being in control of what happens and all of that stuff definitely is like the way that this happened is maybe not like Bene Gesserit behavior, but it certainly seems like something that could have been done by a group of people who are like Bene Gesserit adjacent. So I think the idea that like, is that where the Empress stands? That does seem like it could be plausible, Taran.
I will say, I would have expected after 10,000 years for them to like have a little bit more control over the situation with the whole Paul Atreides thing. You know, like they were really sleeping at the wheel there.
It's so funny to think that like literally there's so many Reddit comments that are just like we're really saying it's 10,000 years, and I feel like somebody said like it'll be 10,000 years. I was like okay, and then everyone was like, oh man, we really shouldn't have said it was 10,000 years because everyone has the most
it's such
a little
huge
itch
amount
that
of
we have.
years.
I know everyone's a little bit like, oh, but 10,000 years is a weird amount of time to say that the show is set before, but it is.
Like our civilization has advanced so incredibly dramatically in the last like 500 years. Like
Yeah,
we've gone from zero technology, electricity, and even that is just like within the last like 150
Yeah, but
years.
what if tomorrow the robots uprise and then we have to destroy them and now we have no thinking technology? How far
We
is our
still
civilization
have
going to
no
advance,
thinking
Taran?
technology. We don't currently have thinking technology. we have learning models.
True. That is true. That is a true fact that you said about our current world. Yeah.
We also don't have spaceships though, so that's fair.
So I think the one thing I would say just about like just to kind of like for me put a little bit of a note here on like Desmond Hart, Empress Carino, or Emperor Carino, Valya, all of this stuff. I thought that like outside of the what does this mean for the show? What are they setting up? What is the lore? You know, what's the mystery? I just thought all of this was like a very fun little thing to put Desmond Hart and then see these like kind of three different reactions and then have like this to me the show almost kind of like once you start to like entangle them, they're more entangled. But if you leave them separately, we kind of have like Game of Thrones politics, and then like elsewhere we kind of have all the like sci-fi stuff, right? Like we're really when we get to the Bene Gesserit ceremony, like the agony, like that's so sci-fi. This is obviously like in a sci-fi show, but it's so political, and I thought it was really fun.
I what I want from this show is for it to keep me on my toes. I want to be here next week.
Unlike Desmond, who gets floated into the air.
Well, yeah, like I want to be on my toes, not on nothing. Because yeah, like I don't want to keep being like I don't want to come back next week and be like feeling the same way. Like, oh, it's this has made me feel even more like this or whatever. Like I liked the fact that I went from, from feeling one way about all the characters in the current situation to feeling a completely different way in this episode. And I want to keep that pace. It's only 6 episodes, so I think it has the ability to just keep you on your toes and keep you from feeling comfortable in the status quo of this, because it doesn't have time for that, and it's not the kind of show for that. I think it doesn't have the writing for that, like, character wise. So like, keep us on this path, and I'll have fun with it.
Do you have much to say about this the rebel cell group that's formed? We have Kieran, we have a Fremen, so she has blue eyes. Some other guy who I can't figure out what he's from, but I definitely know he's from something.
Oh yeah, he's definitely from something. I thought it was pretty boring. I was a little bit wondering about like the Atreides thing. Like, oh, if he's involved in this, then how did the Atreides end up like doing well? But then it was like, yeah, this was all a ploy from the Bene Gesserits to like a planned rebellion. I was like, that's more interesting to me. Here we go, like introducing a thing that I'm like, oh, this is gonna take a while, and then like, oh no, this is like, okay, yeah, I'm on board. I have zero interest in this whole love affair between the dude and the princess, and that whole scene was kind of just like meh to me. Quite honestly, I thought the incredibly long sex scene was more interesting than the incredibly long fight scene between the two of them.
Yeah, I also agree. This is a little like, yeah, there's some stuff here that feels very like it's an HBO show, so doing HBO things of like, yeah, the sex scene, the like, yeah, the love storyline. I'm like, yeah,
sex scene was so long.
That was pretty long.
At first, I was like, oh yeah, it's an HBO show. Oh, we're still doing this. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, we're still here.
Still here.
And then it finally ended, and it was like, yeah, but we're still going to do the scene that we were here for. It's like, you could have just started here.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's the Bene Gesserit storyline, which is this this young girl is gonna do the agony. She's maybe not quite ready, but she's gonna do it anyway because she's Raquel's granddaughter. She's gonna do it. She's told many times you shouldn't do it. They're gonna use you as a pawn, they don't care about you. She arrives. There's a lot in the scene, but I first want to acknowledge, because we've talked about this a lot, when like Lord of the Rings has a really cool scene, and then we just say that scene was really cool. I'm just gonna say I thought this was very cool. This is a very
really cool,
cool interpretation of how this would work.
Yeah, I liked this. I will say my very first thought when they were like, oh, well, should we have her do this thing because she's actually the great granddaughter of the original lady? I was like, yeah, sounds great. Except you murdered her daughter.
Yeah,
and the whole thing is that all of the ancestors. You don't think that's an issue?
Well, can I ask you, Taran? Does Tula? Is this what Tula wanted?
Which one's Tula?
Tula is not Valya Harkonnen. So Valya's sister. Let me just make sure I have her name right.
The nicer lady.
Yeah, the one who is like surrogate mother figure. Like, is there a world where this was like, yeah, I know I'm like your mother figure, but I actually do need to figure out what's going on. And if it comes at the expense of you, because Dorothea is going to show up and be like, Valya Harkonnen killed me with the voice. What does it matter? Who cares?
Yeah, every part of my storytelling instincts tell me that she has to be like the opposition to Mother Superior in some way. But like every scene with her feels so earnest that she's like not hiding anything, which makes me feel like maybe she just turns against Mother Superior eventually. But maybe she is hiding something. That's what I'm saying. I mean, they are moving quickly, but like, it feels like she doesn't belong there. For sure. She does not act like the rest of them. So whether that means she's been doing things behind the scenes or will do things behind the scenes, I feel like there's something there. But I don't know. I just feel like she genuinely did not want to do this and did not want the girl to die.
Well, I think the way you could sort of like say that, like, oh, it did feel like maybe it was supposed to be like sister civil war, is the way in which, like, and I'll say this in a way because I feel like I've been talking a lot about House of the Dragon, and I'll also say it in a way that's not spoiler, which is that, like, it felt like that show was advertised as like, oh, it's Rhaenyra versus Daemon, and then it's very quickly you're like, oh, it's like no, And so I wonder whether you're supposed to feel like there's this tension, but what actually potentially is the story here is that, like, do these two sisters who could otherwise be like torn apart by what's happening in the Bene Gesserit come together to make the Bene Gesserit that to be as powerful of a force as we know in the movies. Like, again, like, this is sort of the thing that's like tricky about a prequel show, but it's like we do know the Bene Gesserit do not dissolve, don't corrupt. Could Tula like turn against her sister and ultimately like pay a price to that, and Valya could pay a price for that in service of the Bene Gesserit becoming more what they become? Like, certainly. um yeah, so I don't know the read on the scene yet or not, whether that was like genuine and this is what happened as a result, and like, oh my god, what a mistake we made, or this was intentional for some reason that we'll see down the line. Either way, I loved this. I loved this stuff. This is, I thought, maybe not the most interesting stuff of the episode, but certainly like maybe the most well done of, like, even if it's maybe a little like not fully formed. I'm like, oh, this looks so cool. It is so interesting and asks a lot of questions, I think.
I think it conveyed well visually what was like. I will say, I think the movies are beautiful.
Mhm.
I didn't really get it. I didn't really get what was happening when he
Yeah,
drank
yeah,
the
yeah.
poison.
Yeah, sure. Mhm.
I feel like this visual helped me understand, and I got it more after the fact, but like this helped me visualize better, I think, what they're trying to get across. And I know it was a little bit different as well, but like it just visually made more sense to me than whatever was happening in the other one in the movie.
Well, can I tell sometimes when I read Dune, sometimes I'd be like, am I not like understanding it because it's old? Because it's like from 1965, or I'm not understanding because it's so modern. Is it so futuristic that I'm like, what do you mean you can talk to all your ancestors? Like, what do you mean? What do you mean biologically you can like not have poison work on you? Like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean? But you just gotta like vibe with it. Um, there's two things that get sort of like questioned in this thing. So one is there's a prophecy. Their show is called Dune Prophecy, which is uh someone will be killed twice, once by blood, once by or born twice, sorry, once by blood, once by spice. Which I think you're right, does seems to be what happened to Desmond Hart, but it's likely not, and it's probably just Paul. That will happen 10,000 years in the future. The other thing that I think is more interesting to me is that her mother is alive. She was lied to by. So this is where it's like, if you're going to question Tula's motivations, Tula Harkonnen's motivations, it's the fact that she has strung this girl along, that her mother is alive, has been
Yeah,
dead.
and that also was like, she's gonna find out, dude. Like, what do you
But maybe she'll be
mean?
in a coma and be possessed. So it doesn't really matter that she finds out. So my question to you, Taran, is: have we seen her mother? Who is she? Is she on the show yet? Does
Hmm.
seem a little silly to not like. It literally could be like, no, your mother's alive and I lied to you and I'm evil. Could be, is your mother a very important character?
Maybe blue-eyed lady.
Could be blue-eyed lady. That's her, like,
She's weird.
send her daughter away and go. Yeah.
Like what? Like what's up with you being so rude about Atreides, dude? You're like, oh, I don't know if you're loyal to the cause, and then you're the one.
Yeah, well, that's
It's
exactly
you. You're
when we play
projecting.
Goose Goose Duck. This is exactly what we all say. Like, oh, you don't seem very loyal. You kind of seem like you're evil. Yeah. And also, I don't know if you saw in the movies, but the Fremen have this thing of like not seeming like they seem very rude. Stilgar comes up and spits on Oscar Isaac. So, they come off a certain way.
um, but yeah, I don't know who else it could be at this point.
Does the math work? I mean, I do think that probably makes some sense. The Fremen girl. I
She
don't.
seems young, but like, who else?
I will say, just to throw something out there, a little treat for the people who will know what I'm talking about. There is an ability by the group of people that people presume that like Desmond Hart is, that we have not yet seen in the movies, or but that could be coming. And so there is like a there is well, I'll just say it feels like I'm being too shady. Taran, how do you feel about shape shifting?
Ooh. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Plant that flag in the ground. It'll get covered up by sand and eaten by a sandworm, but yeah. The only thing I've seen people be a little bit just sorry, I don't want to move on. I was gonna actually kind of move on, but is we do get some terminology here that people are like, is that would have been around again, we're just stuck on the 10,000 year thing, but we do get the worm gets name dropped this episode,
That was
Desmond
the other thing.
literally, yeah.
By the Empress, right?
Shai Halud gets fully named. Yeah.
I was like,
So
how do you know this?
I don't know.
How do
I
you
don't
know this
know.
unless you're involved in all this? Because that felt like a deep pull to me.
So then So I mean, yeah, flag supposedly like that's like Fremen that's like Fremen religion. So how's the Empress know about that? I mean, that does seem to connect her to either the Fremen, or it does seem to connect her to Desmond Hart in a way that I think you were accurately pointing.
Or
So
she's just really well educated, but like,
it's true. But even then, the whole point is that they're like such a. I mean, again, we're 10,000 years, so maybe that's not true. But like the whole point is that like Duncan Idaho, he like it took him it was so hard to like go and be with the Fremen. Like it's so hard. Like it's like there's that's part of the rudeness too. Is that like they're so hard to break through that like it takes so much work, and like Paul eventually figures out, and even and then he's like not fully welcomed in, blah 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 blah. It's like how does she have all this info that she probably shouldn't have at that time? But anyway, shape shifting is in there. Doesn't mean it's in the show. Nobody come at me and say like it is in the show, but shape shifting is in the books. So
Interesting.
Yeah. Anything else from this episode, Taran?
I don't think so. I think like my hope is that this is like it could honestly it feels more Raised by Wolves than it does like proper Game of Thrones-ness. But I'm fine with that because I like the theorizing, and I think it's fun. I hope that this was all of this, or at least most of what we've talked about, was intentional and not just like, oh, she knew it when she knew what it was because the writers didn't realize that she shouldn't, or like so whatever, right? But like I'm bought back in as of right now, and I'm hopeful that episode 3 delivers as well.
Something that I saw being talked about a lot is whether a lot of the girl who does the agony, whether she died. Confirmed that she's not dead. Inside the episode says she's in a coma. So she's not off the table.
When you said that, I was confused because I thought for sure she was dead.
No, inside the episode confirms not dead. So yeah. I agree. I you know what? I do think this is one where it's like when I was writing I was like, I think I might like this more as we talk through it. And I think I'm there. I think I would almost like bump it up in my rating a little bit just after talking about it. So sometimes I like that. I like that when it's like, oh, there's a lot in there that I'm like maybe wasn't appreciating on the first watch through. So yeah, you and I, Taran, will definitely be back seemingly recapping this weekly. We'll see if Josh Wigler is let free from his prison.
Maybe somebody has use for him. Who knows?
Maybe it's a big internal debate about that right now. All right. Anything else, Taran, before we wrap up?
That's it.
All right. We think that's our recap of episode 2. Make sure to subscribe to the We Know Scripted TV feed. And until next time, bye-bye.